Good morning. It's 9 a.m., Monday, July 31st, 2023. This is the Muscatine County Board of Supervisors. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First is to review the agenda.
Move to approve as presented.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Kurt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next is discussion and possible action to approve ordinance 07312301, assuming jurisdiction and control of certain pioneer cemeteries and/or private burial sites located in Muscatine County, Iowa, on the third and final reading.
I didn't see any other feedback come through.
I didn't have any other correspondence.
I would personally like to bring up that I find under the relative great-grandparent is the oldest or the longest link, and as time marches forward, then these places will be not accessible to anyone, right? Once the great-grandchild dies, the next generation will not have access as defined by giving access to a relative.
I think in theory that's true. I think I think there's been a lot of confusion about that. This is, the state law mandates what is required, so a landowner must, but there's nothing that says that a private individual couldn't work with the landowner to gain access. I don't think there's anything that would, and most of the ones we've talked to or have been here have been willing to do that with the right group. So I don't know how you adjust that.
Yes, it follows state code, so I mean, the only way to change that is to go to the state and have
So
the
that this is the
legislature.
state definition of relative.
This is absolutely the state definition. We made no modifications to the state law.
Yeah, our intent was to mirror state law in our resolution so that when state law changes, our resolution would change accordingly.
And as you said, the owner of the cemetery is not, would be able to extend this beyond, who would allow other people.
Yep, absolutely.
Is
There's-
required to allow-
There's nothing in the ordinance that says the private landowner can let anybody he wants onto that. It just says that family members have the rights under state law.
Thank you for the
Yep.
Can I ask for his name?
What's your name, sir?
I'm David Uncle. D-U-N-K-E-R.
How you doing, David? Haven't seen you in a long time. I didn't recognize you either. Yeah, still getting at it.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay, so I will move the approval.
Second.
I got a motion by Jeff, second by Danny. This is a roll call vote. Jeff?
Aye.
Nathan? Aye. I vote aye. Danny?
Aye.
And Kurt?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next is items with County Engineer Brian Horowski. Brian, good morning.
Good morning.
First is discussion and possible action to approve various utility permits.
Yes, we have 3 utility permits today. The first is from Unite Private Networks in West Des Moines, Iowa. They're requesting to install fiber optic cable along Zachary Ave from State Highway 61 south to the intersection of Zachary Ave and 165th Street. They're going to that cell tower that's there. Our second one is also from Unite Private Networks LLC of West Des Moines, Iowa. They are requesting to plow a new fiber on 170th Street from Highway 61 east to 3010 170th Street. That is the existing cell tower there. Pretty short stretch on that one. Our third one is from Windstream Iowa Communications LLC of Little Rock, Arkansas. They're requesting to install a new cable to replace a damaged cable on 180th Street from Highway 22 west to house number 1585, 180th Street. That one is also pretty straightforward.
Okay, I'll move the approval.
Second.
I got a motion by Jeff, second by Danny. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Anything other, Brian?
Nope, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is action to approve for publication the Muscatine County Treasurer's semi-annual report for January 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2023. I believe that's in your packet.
I'll move the approval.
Motion by Jeff, second by Nathan. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
And those would be balances after the transfers we just made, right?
No, that was says June 30.
June 30, okay.
Okay. Next is discussion and possible action to approve the minutes of the July 24, 2023 regular meeting.
Move this, accept.
Motion by Kurt,
Second.
second by Jeff. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes. Correspondence. Jeff, you got anything?
I just would mention that I did go to, they had, the Miller Meeks campaign, cause she was instrumental in getting about a $3 million worth of, money for the clinic here in town. They asked to, so I went to that event. There was half a dozen people there. Good event. And she was excited to see the clinic coming to town.
Okay.
That was it.
All right. Nathan, you have any correspondence?
I do not.
I had nothing to note. Danny?
I had nothing.
Nothing? Kurt? Nothing? Okay. Committee reports? Jeff?
I went to the bi-state meeting on Wednesday, wanted to talk just a little bit, but I think I forwarded to everybody the presentation we got from the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. So everybody is aware that you've seen the wildfires from Canada and what we've seen. So the implication is, that our PM 2.5, which is one of the, controlled, emissions around. Anyway, we have exceedances since then because of the wildfires. And I don't know if you all recall, a number of years ago, there were certain industries in Muscatine, a bunch of them, and MPW and others, that invested hundreds of millions of dollars to mitigate their PM 2.5 and some other, releases. So in the conversation with the DNR, they're gonna attempt to get the EPA out of Kansas City to offer an exclusion for this event. Which what happens is you get these, they do the control over a 3-year average, right? And the problem is if you have, it's like an average of 8 readings over a quarter, right? So that we're gonna have 2 or 3 quarters here, probably 2 quarters where we're gonna have exceedances in this area. And where we'll be in non-attainment. And the issue is if we go into non-attainment, and then you're not, industries won't be able to expand, there's all kinds of negative economic impacts. And the EPA's policy says, while it clearly says that is an exclusionary event, it's allowed, they only look at it if it puts you into non-attainment. And we think that's a bad thing to have happen, because you're running the dice that you won't have it next year or the year after, because you'll have these values in the non-attainment values in the area that could really hamper industry. Muscatine County, we are not Scott County in the Quad City region, because they go by MSA, is right on the border, where they'll be in non-attainment, with these values. Muscatine County, we're okay, but I just think it's a bad thing. So I think we should consider, anytime we have any of our political events or any groups that we have, any that we're members of or affiliated with, that we would want to have them put pressure to the EPA to make this a nationwide exclusionary event. Because if you looked at the smoke plume from that presentation, it goes down well into the southern part of the US. This will impact, Ohio and Indiana, and if you think about all the industry in the Great Lakes region, this could have far-reaching impact on business and their ability to operate. So it was a very good presentation, but it was very concerning as well. I think bi-state, Denise was very concerned that they would not exclude this as a cast event, and then that we could have this bad data go forward in future years, because who knows what could happen. So it was very interesting, and I think we should probably think about, and I think the bi-state group might be trying to put together a letter that we could share, and then maybe we could push it out to organizations. Cause it was interesting that even the implication on, you know, corn crops and soybean were, was it, ozone, was hit soybeans more, PM 2.5 was more, corn was more susceptible to that. So, it'll have implication probably to the farm group too, so.
So it sounds like Scott has even worse air quality, or their air quality is not as good as ours.
The monitoring station there, the PM 2.5, I think the control standard is like 33 microns per whatever. And I think their reading is like at 32.
But like normally they're
Normally,
right up against.
they're
that
right
line.
up, they're like 1 point off of that. We're down in the 20s. Okay, so you know, with all the effort done here. But again, you don't want to lose all your,
Sure.
and you know, and I think Denise's point, you know, that would affect Scott, you know, across the river, Mercer, there's 4 or 5 counties
Rock
that would
Island.
be, Rock
Yeah.
Island, you know, it could have far-reaching implications, so.
Well,
Very good.
another point on this, these fires have burnt for how many months?
Yeah, no kidding.
And there doesn't seem to be any end in sight, as far as the fire not burning any longer. So I don't know if winter will impact that, but I don't know.
I'm
It's-
sure they're hoping the winter
They're
will
hoping
put it
so.
out, but the other thing is,
When
you
you
know,
got something that hot that's burning though,
yeah,
It's 3
when,
months on.
you know, forest fires are a reflection of policy, forest management policies. And if forest management policies have changed significantly in Canada, unless we see policy changes, you'd be a fool to think you're not gonna have them in future years. It'd be just foolish to think it's not gonna continue to happen, so.
yeah. And my point being, if it continues to burn through the winter and into next year,
You could have, I think that was Denise's point.
there's no way that the majority of the country here will be able to meet the guidelines.
I think they take your eight worst readings per quarter, and then they take over a 3-year, all the quarters in 3 years. So you can see if you've got, you know, they've been since May 18th, we've been getting elevated readings, and they're still there, you know, they're still happening. So, you know, you're gonna have 2 quarters probably of this year where you'll have, out of attainment readings in PM 2.5 and ozone, I think were the 2, right, Scott? I think PM 1.0 and SO, I think it was ozone and 2.5, so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's,
But anyway, so I think the point is, I think we need to, you know, there were kind of, there was, the DNR is kind of, well, wait and see, we're negotiating with Kansas City, and I don't think anybody wants to wait and see. I think we wanna take industry groups that we can get to and try to get them to get some political power behind this and say, this is nonsense, we
Yeah.
should exclude these events, cause it's out of your control.
yeah. Okay. Any committee reports for you, Nathan?
I do not have any.
Okay. I just had the bi-state meeting as well with Jeff. That's the only thing I had. Danny?
7/26 Iowa Workforce Development, Finance Committee meeting. That was all I had.
Okay, Kurt?
Thursday the 27th, I had the We Lead, meeting last week.
Okay. Very good. Next is items with the administration office. First is discussion and possible direction regarding evaluating the use of a property's CSR when determining suitable usage of land. I'm not even sure where to open this discussion.
Well, the reason I asked to put it on the agenda was when we had the issue with the hog confinement and the gentleman that was not allowed to build a house, kind of his reasoning for then building a couple hog confinement buildings. And it looks like the inconsistency with our CSR rating limits being, if any of the CSR ratings is 55 or above, that it's one of the restrictions that may stop somebody from building a house on their farm ground. And in the ordinance, it says CSR rating for land, Muscatine County's rich soil is the asset to be valued and protected while being utilized to our greatest potential. Applications which are proposed property has a corn sustainability rating of 55 or higher, as calculated by weighing average of the entire parcel, should generally not be granted. This factor is of high importance. So that's what we got in there. And the next action item is for our wind and solar, which I got both of them here. And the same standards don't hold true to when we want to do something like that. So I asked for it to be on the agenda so we could have a discussion and kind of see what direction we thought was best to get them in line.
And I think, Eric, I know at Bi-State, Bi-State approved that contract with Muscatine County on that's our long-term plan that and will these type of issues, are those addressed in there?
Sure. When you update your comprehensive plan or even adopt a new one, there's a whole lot of data that's gathered. Employment trends, housing trends, transportation trends, employment, housing issues, needs, economic, income, median income of the population, growth of this town versus that town versus the unincorporated areas. We look at all the issues, all the pros and cons of the way we're doing business when it comes to land use, and then it helps you lay out a vision and establish goals for managing land use. So yeah, this type of thing, when you update your comp plan, it'll look at a lot of those things. Do we need to encourage more housing out in the country? Do we want to encourage housing closer to towns, as our current and past plans have been closer to towns and selected residential corridors, just like commercial or industrial development? It paints an overall large picture of how you should address land use policy.
So in reality, we've probably, though not specifically addressing like the first one, which is the CSR so that's rural residents.
That's a special use permit that's allowable, that's available in the A1 agricultural district, rural residence special use permit. And then when that ordinance was adopted, when that was implemented as a special permitted use in the A1 district, there was a list of criteria that were adopted along with it that the board shall consider. And then if you look at the application in the ordinance, it assigns like high importance, moderate importance, or lower importance to the different criteria that they look at. And the CSR is one that's listed of high importance, with a stated goal of allowing under certain circumstances limited non-farm related housing, while at the same time minimizing conflict between agricultural uses. It's identified and recognized within our comp plan and our zoning ordinance that agriculture does have a potential, just by nature, for conflict with non-agricultural residents. The grain dryers and pits, the aerial spraying, the smells of manure application in large feedlots, and that type of thing. And so the goal is to allow, under certain circumstances, minimal non-farm related housing while minimizing conflict with existing ag uses. So
I think, I'm just kind of back on history here at the board, so I guess the good news is that, development is starting to be a new thing. We haven't experienced problems with it for a few years, but, I remember, initially when I came on the board, there were a number of issues that came up around residential development in rural, a lot of it around cities, like here in Muscatine, we had a lot of fur flying on Bayfield Road, because, folks move to the country and they expect city services, and that's not how our whole system is designed. And so I think that, maybe the right way to go with this is go through the land use and this plan to address that, because I know we've had conversations about some of the feed operations, right? Some of the confinements and their impact on roads and road services, and, because it's a little bit different than when you're a grain farmer, you can haul in the morning, you kind of have a little more flexibility of when you can go on a road as the spring thaw happens. When you're feeding livestock, you have less flexibility. They have to be fed, they have to be cared for. And I think those are things that, as we look at our long-term sustainability of our roads, long-term funding of all of this, we need to keep that in mind. I think I think it's a big thing, and I don't know what the best way is. The best way to try to address it with that long-term plan, Eric, is that your recommendation?
Look, I first want to just clarify so everybody's 100% clear, because the statement made that the CSR could keep someone from building a house on their farm. If it's a farm exempt scenario, CSR is not even in the equation. A farmer who is engaged in active income producing ag activity does not have to apply for a special use permit. They are by state code exempt, can build anywhere on their land that they want. Zoning and building codes do not apply to farm exempt scenarios. So the houses that would be prohibited under our current requirements for special use permit would be for non-farmers. People that just want to buy a piece of ground from a farmer or just a landowner, may not even be a farm.
Or if a farmer wants to split off a
Split off
chunk
a
and build
chunk
a
and
second
sell
house.
it. Sell a chunk
But
of
then
house.
we have subdivision rules that come into effect as well, correct?
Oh, certainly, we have residential zoning, R1, R2, R3 zoning, where we, and that'll be examined in the comprehensive land use plan too. What do we got left for available lots in our residential subdivisions? The comp plan speaks very strongly to encouraging residential growth in existing or planned residential areas, existing subdivisions, where there are good streets. They're more typically, they're encouraged to be nearby city limits, you know, for fire support, or where infrastructure like sewer and water is going to be in the more near future, able to be extended for those near existing parks and libraries and city services. That's what you generally see development areas around within a 2-mile buffer area of any incorporated town that has all those kinds of services available. That's where the areas that our comp plan encourages residential growth. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
And when it comes to CSR, when we look at special use, when the Board of Adjustment looks at special use permits for rural residents, it says right in there, if an area is particularly well suited for residential development, rezoning is the preferred method of doing that. So there may be areas right outside the city limits served by fully paved roads that may have a higher CSR that are actually strong candidates for rezoning, simply by nature of where they're located. You know, so that doesn't stop a rezoning. Now, CSR is certainly something that we look at when we consider rezoning, but, you know, as cities grow outward, eventually they're gonna run into some better farm ground, but there may be, the totality of the circumstances may add up to where this is ideally suited for residential development. We're talking about those limited basis ones clear out in the country, nowhere near towns, and the emphasis has been on preserving prime farm ground.
So I'm clear on the current rules, Eric, so, you know, cause I think where we typically see this is when you have, as traditional farms are turning over, you know, maybe the farmstead hasn't been used for years, or maybe it's in disrepair. The new ownership tends to wanna carve those off and just sell them or do something with them. So as long as as long as there's a structure there, it hasn't been, that has been there for years, that use is allowed to continue. Even I could sell that, if I bought a farm and I wanted to sell Danny the house, I could do that as long as there was a house.
As long as it's 10 years old. As long as the structure is at least 10 years old, you can split it off on a parcel of at least 1 acre or more and sell it. And we put the 10-year factor in there to keep people from wanting to abuse the farm exemption. Whereas if I owned 120 acres, I could go to 140 and I get a farm exemption. I build myself a house and then turn around and put it on the market. I go over here to my next 40, qualify for a farm exemption. So the zoning commission and the board of supervisors at the time approved that 10-year amendment. So that kind of discourages people from using farm exemption to create,
Because you could.
if you could. But this way, you're gonna live in it for at least 10 years before you try to turn around.
Is there a
and sell it.
minimum size of the farming parcel to,
There's not, and that's one of the biggest challenges across the state of Iowa is that every county is allowed to come up with their own farm definition.
so I could plant 4 tomato plants and be agricultural?
Our definition says the parcel must be primarily used for income producing ag activity, the primary use. So if you have a $500,000 house and you have 1 4-H pig, I'm gonna have a hard time, you know, approving a farm exemption saying that the primary use is income producing ag activity. And so a lot of people wanna, well, what's the minimum acreage that I need? I can't give it, we don't have that. From
Yeah.
time to time, I thought we should re-examine, should we clarify our, it's my understanding the courts have said you can't use minimum acreage alone as your basis for determining farm exemption. You have to determine that it's primarily adapted by size and use for income producing ag activity.
And seeing how attempts to overly focus in on one standard work in the legal realm, which is not too well, in my opinion. I think a reasonableness standard is probably, which you kind of de facto have, I think is the way to go.
I've tried to look at a synonym for primarily, if someone comes to me with 20 acres and at least 11 is tillable ground, primarily, in my mind, is the same as majority.
Sure.
If 51% of your land is being used for active income producing crop activity, I consider that primarily. Now, again, you get down below 10 acres, is it really primarily agricultural, is it primarily residential use? Most people aren't farming 10 acres though anymore. You have to be actively farming it. You can't rent it out to a neighbor, collect the rent check and claim farm exemption. The Attorney General has given that opinion. You have to actively be engaged in the farming. Now, if you had 10 acres and you had a cattle lot with 20 head of cattle though, that's primarily agricultural.
So I'm looking at the magic map with the zoning overlay, and you said we wanna look at where we encourage residential development in the county. The appropriate thing would be a zoning change, so I'm not necessarily gonna see a bunch of pre-zoned residential land waiting to be developed. It would be currently zoned agricultural most likely, and it's kind of on a as appropriate basis.
It's
that
been
you
a long
rezone.
time, it predates me when the county zoned large swaths of area.
Sure.
Residential, industrial, you could do that, you can do that, I assume it takes some sort of landowner participation or for the courts, but, what we've seen in the last 20 years have been, as the markets have demanded them, developers come to us or individual owners and request. It's been a long time since we've laid out for future growth,
Okay.
whole swaths of, of residential land.
Well, you wouldn't wanna do that very often.
No, you would, I mean, there's a time and place to do it, to encourage and steer growth into certain areas, cause it really doesn't hurt the landowner. I mean, you can continue to farm it, even if we zone it for future use. There are some things that get restricted, some of the special use permits are no longer available to you once it's zoned residential.
Some of the places where I, struggle with it is, we don't, we wanna support property owners' rights and allow them to do what they want on their property, but I know we still need restrictions and laws in place that we don't just run amok on that, but, we allow these people to build, whether it's a hog confinement or on our wind and solar, we allow, could be up to our best, soil rating to be put into wind and solar at maybe an alarming rate coming up. I know we got 1,200 slated down there, south of the airport currently, and on that project that's gonna go from Muscatine to Louisa County. I think there's that's a 43, there's 2,900 in Louisa County and 1,200 in Muscatine County, and there's other companies in the area looking for wind or solar projects. So where do we draw the line on protecting property rights that we will allow them to do several things, but not build a house or split it off for a child or another family member, if maybe that's what they wanna do? And do we value that CSR rating like we do in here? It's a factor of high importance, and if that's the case, why is it not a high importance when we're letting several thousand acres or hundreds of acres go into wind and solar? So I think we just need to get in line on it. I don't know if we need to have you take it to the board and maybe put something together that you can bring back and present to us, or I don't know the best method, but I don't think we're consistent on what we're saying and what our policies are.
Well, it's apples and oranges a little bit here, because with the solar and wind situation, those are, as I understand, set up for long-term leases of 20, 25 years is what I keep hearing. And at a point in time when that lease is up, They have, in some cases, have the right to renew the lease. Otherwise, if there's no market there at that point in time for this solar and this wind, there's decommissioning programs and plans to remove that solar and wind equipment, machinery, roads, whatever, and turn it back into from where it came, which will be agricultural ground, as I understand it. Now nobody knows, I don't believe, what level on the reclaim it's going to be in regard to productivity and so on and so forth. I think that's yet to be seen, but there will be a level of productivity there. We don't know if it's going to be better, worse, whatever. We don't know this. At least I certainly don't. So that's different than, let's say, a gentleman wants to put in a hog feeding operation, swine barn, or wants to put in a chicken operation. It's, in my mind, it's different because it's a smaller footprint on this agricultural use that probably the intent is not to reclaim it back into actually being farmed. Although it could be if at a point in time, because we see it with all types of old housing and farmsteads and things where they come in, bulldoze it out, farm right through it.
When you talk about large chicken houses, hog houses, it's almost a moot point because it's exempt anyway. I mean, we have zero authority to encourage or discourage agricultural use, you know.
The kicker there, in my mind, is for these agricultural uses, if you end up building more and more residential housing into the rural areas, in my mind, what that does, it actually hampers and curtails the ability for the agricultural business in the county and the state to expand, because now we have the distance problems between residents and an ag operation.
Certainly, and that's been a backdoor mechanism that some counties have attempted to use to stymie large confined animal feeding operations, encouraging residential growth, including subdivisions out in some outlying areas, but then what that brought with it was the requirement to spend a lot of money on roads and bridges just to keep hog confinements away.
What's the,
It's a method that's been used, but it has a high price tag.
what's the hog confinement setback?
It depends on the size of the facility. It starts at around, I believe, 1,250 feet and goes up from there depending.
And that's in a radius, that's not a diameter, right? So nothing within,
Right.
so if you had, and I'm just thinking out loud, quarter mile, or not quarter, excuse me, a whole square mile of farmland divided up into whatever, and you plopped the smallest size, or you planted a house right in the middle of that, dead center in this square. So 1250 in all directions, you basically got a half-mile exclusion zone in the middle of this square mile of where you can put a hog confinement operation.
Of a certain size, there are still hog confinements if you're below, I believe below 500 animal units, there isn't any of
But
those.
something of any substantial
Right, but because the
size.
majority of them are gonna be in that 500 animal unit.
And it might be, there's ones I assume that are greater than 1250.
Oh, absolutely.
So you could, with one house, could theoretically spike any kind of hog confinement line on a whole square mile.
Potentially.
I mean, depending on its size, or the proposed size. So I guess, to me, Danny, it's not about, I mean, I certainly value property rights and everybody should be able to do with what they want. The conflict or the tension comes to me when people's property rights are in conflict. Because a homeowner plopping, or somebody plopping a house down in one of these sections immediately negatively impacts the freedom of somebody else neighboring as to what they can do with their land.
That's a good point.
So I guess to me then, the way I would resolve a competing set of property rights is what is the value that we want to promote. And I think our statute, CSR is not perfect because it does, I think, it results in these things that look strange, like, well, I can't build a house, but I can build a hog confinement, or I can build a solar plant. But I think in reality, the solar plant's not gonna, or a solar panel's not gonna complain about stinky pigs, as we've seen homeowners will. And so, you know, the type of value I think we wanna have in our agricultural land is agriculture, and so that's why I'm in favor of largely retaining the current statute. Do we wanna tweak it, clarify it to make sure that CSR is not the only thing? I consider that, but the way I evaluate the competition between the property rights, the types of them, is in favor of agriculture and agriculturally well-suited areas.
I think you have two issues that we're looking at. One is making an effort to minimize conflict, and to your point, which you already made, there's not conflict between a hog building and solar panels.
Yeah.
But I think Danny's concerned, when you just look at the language within the comprehensive
Yeah,
plan.
it seems weird.
It says of high importance is preserving our most valuable asset, which in the public opinion, when the last comp plan was done, was agricultural, prime agricultural ground. And so then we allow it to go under 600 acres under solar. And I think it will be addressed for sure, because that is an issue now. It wasn't an issue in 2014, we weren't seeing this.
And in regard to your comment on like when solar goes in, you know, you may not smell hog manure next door, but from my experience talking to a lot of people that aren't going to get the solar on their ground, or they'll just have a house in the back, that having them solar panels and windmills all around them is not attractive to them, and I think it may impact their property value. For an example, I was talking to a friend over the weekend at a wedding reception, and he's off of that back road to Grandview, and they're gonna be all around his place. He only has 10 acres. He's not part of the process. He is considering starting a lawsuit against Orion because they're gonna significantly drop his property value in his perception of it is. And he doesn't want them things around him, and he thinks it's gonna heat up they're gonna be all around his house. He thinks he's gonna deal with a lot warmer temperature and less attractiveness around him. So there's a lot of concerns for property owners around that too.
I mean, I hear you. I think there's a difference, and it's probably a fine line and more of a spectrum than a real clear dividing line between the use I can derive from my property and how somebody else nearby affects my property value. Because here we'd be potentially shutting down a potential use of an agricultural property versus the enjoyment they may derive. And again, that's not a fine line, but you know, if I have a neighbor who builds an ugly monstrosity of a house next to me, unless I live in a subdivision, I don't really have much to say about them lowering my property values. So, to me, it's a little bit different.
Yeah,
I'm not insulting your house, Jeff.
It's interesting that, you know, I'm just sitting there trying to reconcile a few things that we've heard lately. You know, when I drive up, if you drive north of Iowa City very much up to towards Solon, you see signs all over about, you know, I don't know what it is about, you know, basically depicting the agricultural lifestyle, and if, you know, don't move to the country if you don't appreciate these kinds of things. So I kind of try to, that's that conflict inherent to what your expectation. And then the other thing is, I think back, Kurt, I think you and I attended what they call them, Clean Energy District or whatever. And you know, kind of the prevailing thought was that, you know, they were concerned that counties and areas were creating zoning laws and using zoning as a tool to adopt poison pills to prevent certain activities. And I'm like, well, okay, I don't think that's my intention. My intention is to let the landowner decide what's best for him and his family long-term with their land. Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know.
Well, and I imagine it's
I don't know
a
the best
few
way to-
counties
One thing to think about as you
that do that.
know, we considered it once with the solar, was, you know, do we attach a CSR factor on this, especially like we do rural residences? If so, or if not, why not? The environmental impact, there is at least an argument for attaching or encouraging solar into less productive farm ground. Sure. If you take the island, for example, solar panels in lower productivity soil, especially high permeability soils like the sands down there, are not gonna contribute to water quality issues. Intensive agriculture use in some of these areas, as we talk about water quality, we're putting chemicals on sand and then we're irrigating it, and it does go right through. If you look where our high nitrates are in Muscatine County, it's the sandy soils. And so, so one of the things when you look at potential land uses, although it's sometimes a smaller part, it is an environmental concern too. There is an advantage to ceasing agricultural activity on some of this more susceptible soil and encouraging it on the ground that binds the nutrients, the higher productive soil hold the nutrients better. Just same thing with slopes, we make every effort to hold nutrients on, avoid runoff and that kind of thing. So that is one argument that could be made for steering them towards lesser productive soils. It's actually more environmentally friendly than some ag practices.
I guess if we're gonna keep the solar and wind policy the same with no restrictions for the soil rating, I think that doesn't mean we aren't gonna have other restrictions still in the ordinance, but I guess I'm leaning towards removing the 55 or higher for one of the restrictions on the home. That doesn't mean there isn't other restrictions that we need to either continue to keep implemented or maybe implement more that make sense, but I just think the two need to be in line, and if we're not gonna change the solar policy, which maybe isn't the best thing to do, I think we ought to remove the 55. Now, I'm assuming even that ground down there is higher than 55, even though it's sandy, it's not the best soil. I bet it's higher than 55.
Probably depends. I'd have to look at it. I don't know, it gets pretty sandy.
Well, I think maybe the best course forward is as a part of the land use plan that we're, that's gonna be a 6-month effort, but, and
And
it's
it will
pretty.
certainly, because this is an emerging issue.
Yeah, the last time we did this, so they hold public hearings.
Oh, we'll have
in
multiple.
all over the county, I remember I was over in West Liberty, there were well attended, a lot of people, giving input on all these type of issues. I'd be interested to see what landowners say, because I know when we did the wind and solar, we had a lot of feedback. We got a ton of feedback. We got solar developers. We also had, groups like the Farm Bureau that weighed in and what they felt. And I hold a lot of weight there because, I don't think through all the things 100%, but I kind of think about, it's your land, you should be able to do what you want, but you do impact your neighbor. And we need to make sure we're.
Yeah, right.
And
all parts of this impact our neighbor, whether it's hog confinement, whether it's a house, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, so we gotta pay attention to how that's gonna impact them, because we just can't always put the guy next to us out, we gotta consider him somewhat.
Yeah, 100%.
But at the same time, and I know there's city zoning laws, but imagine a world in which there's not. If someone took one of those blank areas within Muscatine that have remained farmland, and that there's a few fields like that, and wanted to put a hog confinement operation in there, I think there'd be a holy hellstorm, and rightly so, because you don't want a hog confinement operation in the middle of Muscatine, or West Liberty, or whatever. So, how does the owner's rights play there? I mean, that's, it's a double-edged sword, and so I think, maybe the solution, not the solution, but maybe one of the things is to factor in agricultural value, not just CSR. CSR seems like kind of a blunt tool here. Because certainly there are things that we want to promote that maybe aren't just the growing of corn. And I'm not saying that's all CSR does, but in any event, does it make sense to consider something along those lines? And I mean, the other concern I really have is, I think this board has fairly strong, and I think the discussion bears out, a fairly strong commitment to property owners' rights. We may have disagreements on how that gets, how the rubber meets the road on that. But I can envision a day when board owners or the board is more concerned, whoever those members are less concerned and are more interested in imposing their own vision upon the county. And that's what worries me. I mean, we've got to legislate not just for what we think, knowing we would handle the controls well, or thinking we would, but for what a board in 20 years is going to do. And if we create a system that's exploitable, or, you know, that we don't think through really well, then that's my concern, that it's really going to disadvantage a lot of people and won't have the fair-mindedness that we do. Not that I'm saying we're great, but
Right.
we're perfect,
Well,
but.
I disagree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you on your statement there. And it's probably not an easy solution here, and I don't know what path we need to take forward, or if he needs to start with the board, and maybe craft something that he can bring back to us. I think it needs to probably be in there that the potential new residents that may move to the county need to understand some of the county life. And they have to accept whether it's the roads, whether it's the smell, or all the things you mentioned earlier, because that's just part of what it's like out there.
We have that. When the last comp plan was developed, we developed a brochure called Guide to Country Living that talks about all those things, potential conflict with agriculture. You know, it recognizes it as one of our biggest resources. It talks about delays in snow removal, gravel roads, delays in fire and emergency response when you live out in the country, all these things that you can expect when you live. So that is in our comp plan, actually, the Guide to Country Living. And I think we will see this very topic being studied as part of the comp plan development, because this is an emergent issue. You couple that with what the opinions were, I guess it was only about 10 years ago that we did the comp plan, and right at the beginning of the comp plan, during development of the last comprehensive plan, it was found that there was strong support for farmland preservation and emphasis for land development. So those two issues are gonna be wrestled with for sure in the comp plan, and some recommendations will likely come out of it.
I mean, the one thing I'm sure of is that we can't think of everything.
Right.
And there's a cheesy little story, but it's true. I think it's true. Back in colonial India, when the British were ruling, there were too many cobras killing people, so the British government put out a bounty on cobra heads. Well, people decided, hey, we're gonna breed the suckers, and started turning into cobra heads. Then the British said, no, this is a dumb idea, we're gonna stop it. Then the people let all the cobras go, which made the problem far, far worse than it was. And so I wanna make sure we don't do that. I fully support the idea, let's meet with a bunch of people, let's bring everybody and let's talk to them, see what they think. Get that idea, so that we're not just sitting here guessing we know what the property owner's concerns are, but that we know what they actually are.
And that is, you pretty much summed up what the comprehensive plan update process looks like. Massive amounts of public input and data gathering, recommendations, and then kind of cut off, and then more and more refined each phase, and then we have a steering committee, and then you got the zoning commission involvement, and multiple public input sessions. And I think
I find it kinda ironic, we all got in our mailboxes this week a brochure, a survey from Iowa State University, around a lot of these issues.
you
So
got
this-
that one too.
Yeah, this is not something I think that just this board is gonna be, I think all boards are struggling with it, and probably, hopefully Iowa State will be able to put some research to it and give us some guidance as well, because it's a tough one. I mean, cause, you know, you look at some of the lease agreements, you know, that they're doing, it's like, you know, as a landowner, I'd be a really hard time walking away from some of that financial security for years for a family.
And even 10 years ago in our comp plan, one of the goals was to continue towards development of policies that address green energy, renewable energy, utilizing more and more. 10 years ago, it was in there. It wasn't at the top of our priorities, but it was in there, exploring more avenues for renewable energy and less dependence on fossil fuels. So, it was a consideration then. It's just way more so now.
Eric, if someone is building a housing addition, can they write in a covenant in their addition that addresses farm life, smells, noise,
Within their addition?
within their addition?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Most homeowners associations that have restrictive covenants will address what types of animals you can have within the subdivision. Most of them don't.
I know a couple of them right around West Liberty, there's a turkey facility, buildings, and then on the half mile the other way, there's a hog building right around the golf course there that.
Is your question about whether they highlight that to neighbors, or
Well, they can't,
they can't
they
control
can't
it?
Yeah, they
restrict
can't control
neighboring
that, but-
farm use.
Cause you know, we had a few years ago when we were changing some animal units in a operation's been there since the eighties, and a subdivision that came in the
Right.
2000 timeframe, all the 40 or so residents or of the residents were complaining about the odors and shouldn't be allowed to do it. It's like, you know, it's a little hard to say 'cause he was there long before you, and
Right.
you know. And I think once they learned that, they kind of tamped down a little bit. But you know, this is, I think, you know, if I were a developer putting it, I probably wouldn't highlight that. Just saying. Not that I'd hide it, but I don't think I'd highlight it. And a covenant might highlight it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You know, that's a very, very good question.
Well, you know, you can put that in print and you can highlight it and you can talk about it.
Till it happens.
But if you've never experienced it and never lived it, you certainly don't understand it. I see it happen a lot.
That's correct.
And the response is, oh, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. Well, until you've lived it, you really don't understand what you're dealing with in country living and everything from drilling and maintaining your own well and the cost of that, and everything from your own septic system and maintaining and what has to happen there to, I mean, there's umpteen things that are not considered if you've never experienced it. You know, anything as simple as if the wind direction is such when they're combining beans in the fall, and the amount of dust particulate that you experience, and I mean, it's the list is long. The list is long, and it's a learning curve. And road dust, that's the one I hear the most about. That's the one I hear the most about, you know, and somebody builds out, and then I've had a handful of calls and conversations in my time on the board that, what's it gonna take to get this road treated? Not gonna happen. You know, you can do it in front of your place or as far as you wanna go, as far as I'm concerned, but yeah, the county taxpayers aren't gonna do that for you. So there's a lot to think about when you make that move. So,
So on that item, is there any direction we're given to move to the next step?
So I think what we should do, maybe it sounds like, is let's keep these questions at the forefront as we go through this update to our comprehensive plan, and let's try to challenge people on that and say, is this still pertinent? Is this still what we believe, or should we put language in there that would give us more leeway in these situations? I'm 100% with that. Cause I also think we don't, you know, I think we need to talk about paved roads, you know, cause we've had, you know, I don't know how much damage happened on Bayfield when they had that concrete trucks out there, 300,000?
Yeah, very significant.
You know, I mean, because people also don't understand is when you move into the country, some activities are curtailed. Yeah, I get you might wanna start that garage in April, but guess what? We're not gonna let a concrete truck run out there because it's too much weight until a certain time. And, you know, we had that happen where it cost the county taxpayer $300,000 because we had individuals that didn't understand that and went around the rules, you know.
Yeah,
And at some point, you know, we may take action against people like that because it's not fair to the average taxpayer.
Yeah, Brian had we had a very preliminary conversation about just, you know, the future and what roads look like, and I agree with you, Jeff. I think our policies should maybe more strongly word where we are going to encourage or even allow residential development, because we've seen the impact to inferior road surfaces that aren't intended for that. You know, then the question is, do we spend the money up front to steer growth into these selected areas by installing the paved roads and say this is, you know, or do we put that back on the developer and just do it piecemeal as they extend out there? Because you have limited tools to steer growth interest areas, right?
Well, I think we also need to talk about the obvious and substantial non-compliance with seasonal residential uses. Because obviously we're not gonna go out there and arrest people for, you know, you staying in their cottage year round when they're not supposed to, but we need to figure out a solution to discourage those kind of uses going forward where they're likely to be abused. Cause that's not fair to the taxpayer at all.
No, there's added costs to providing this.
Immense added costs, both in terms of added costs of simply maintenance and the low utility you get from servicing only a few people.
Right.
Okay,
Well, if you can come up with a tool for doing that, Nathan, I'm.
Why do you think we hired you?
I can give the deputies a zoning book and have them check in.
There you go. They don't have enough to do.
I wouldn't mind commenting on what Jeff said about Bayfield. That's a great example for it. It wasn't the right, it was before my time, but it wasn't the right surface type of a road. So it got seal coated, and then it wasn't really made for subdivisions. And now that you have some people who maybe aren't used to living out into the country, they want the road to be upgraded, say with shoulders or wider shoulders. They're very narrow now. Well, now that there's been so much development, there's really no room to build the highway that they want because there's houses now in your way or developments. So it is very challenging.
Yeah, it was kinda interesting. I was just this weekend, I was up on that Veterans Memorial Parkway in Davenport, you know, it's like a super highway built out in the middle of a field, but I said, you know, probably a really good idea that they saw that there was potential for residential development in a mass scale there. They built infrastructure that's appropriate for that, because, you know, you run concrete trucks over roads for a while and you'll residential development is very hard on the infrastructure leading into it for a short period, because those, you know, a ready-mix truck has a lot of weight. In a house, you know, you're gonna run, you know, 6, 8 ready-mix trucks for every house, you know, between your foundation and your flat work, and, you know, that's a lot of weight and really hard on roads. So I think it's all stuff to consider and think about, but, if we were gonna encourage it, you know, that's, you know, I think Scott County, and I don't know, this may not be true, I thought that, you know, cause I know they're really struggling with a residential development in the rural county as well, but I believe in Scott County, they wind up with all the roads. They wind up owning those residential subdivision roads as well, and that is a big problem for them, big problem for them. You know, kind of, you know, probably heard me say that, you know, you know, I'm kind of talk out of both sides of my mouth on codes, you know, sometimes, but, you know, I believe if you have them, then you need to enforce them, you need to inspect to them, you need to require, you know, I know we have areas in town where we have subdivisions that were built to a specification and the roads were not installed to that specification. So here you have homeowners that are gonna have to fix all that substandard construction, and somebody made money on that. And that, to me, is part of the role of government, is if we have standards and we say it's built to a standard, we need to make sure it's made to that standard. If it's not, we shouldn't allow it to happen, because future people are making decisions based on that, so just kind of whether you believe it or not, you know, we have zoning ordinances, they were put in, what, 2000? Is that about when we put them in? We adopted zoning in Muscatine County in 2000?
Oh, way before that.
Put it back into the 60s.
Oh, okay.
Basic zoning, how it's operated.
Maybe it was building codes in 2000.
2004 on building codes.
Yeah.
okay. So 9A and B both kind of fall under the same umbrella here, in that we'll just take and work forward with the comprehensive plan going forward and work at that direction. Is that the consensus of the board?
Works for me.
Yeah, okay, very good. Anything other, Nancy, on the administration side?
No,
No, okay. Receive information from county employees. Do I have any county employees that wish to address the board on the issue?
I just have an announcement.
Quinn?
Go ahead.
Okay,
That-
thanks. I just want to announce that we've been served to know that September 12th will be a special election for the Wise and Muscatine School District. It's two public measures. The first one is a revenue purpose statement to authorize expenditures from revenue received from the state secure and advanced vision for education fund. And the other question is to continue to levy the voter-approved physical plant and equipment property tax and impose an income surtax. So that special election will be held September 12th.
And they have to pay for that, right?
Yes, it's at their cost.
What's the third one?
There was two, it's two public
The
measures.
levy and the,
The levy, and then, ordering an election on a revenue purpose statement to authorize expenditures from revenue received from the state secure and advanced vision for education fund.
Okay, very good. Quinn, would you like to address?
Just briefly, I guess I'd like to give hats off to our staff with the sheriff's office. We've just come off probably the biggest 2 weeks that we've had in a long time, between the fair, and then Ragbri over the weekend. We were able to work through both of those with little to no overtime, with our staff utilizing our sheriff's patrol guys and then our regular road staff. In addition to those two, events, we had two pretty significant, things here in town. Between the shooting 2 weeks ago, we had another deal, last week. Our patrol staff worked very closely with the police department patrol staff on both of those. So I'd just like to give hats off to those guys.
Okay,
Yeah, I was out and about this weekend, and I thought things went really well. It was well orchestrated. I didn't, you always have issues, but I thought things went well and seemed like everybody had a good time. I think you and your crew did a great
There
job.
might be a complaint come in, but that was probably on me, so.
Yeah, that's typical.
That's where my mouth started around when my brain kicked in, so.
Yeah, whatever.
all right,
I've been there.
Conflict of interest with one of the riders, so.
very good. Thanks, Quinn. Next is received comments from the public. Do you have anyone from the public that would like to address the board on any issue at this time? Seeing no one come forward, it is 10:03, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.